when my son looked across the Christmas dinner table, his wife's hand gripping his arm, and said the words, "You are no longer family." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even let them see me tremble. I just smiled, slow and deliberate, as if those words meant nothing to me at all. And maybe at that moment they didn't. Maybe because deep down I knew something they had forgotten. Something that would come back to haunt them. I set down my fork, the silver clinking softly against the china. Around me, the table was heavy with food, candles flickering against polished glasses, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon still hanging in the air. But the warmth of Christmas had turned cold. The room itself felt hostile now, as though the walls were pressing in, waiting for me to break. I stood. My chair scraped back across the floor, the sound sharp enough to cut through the silence that followed his words. "Excuse me," I whispered, though my voice carried enough to make everyone hear. I walked out, past the twinkling lights of the tree, past the smiling family portraits that still included me, at least for now, and stepped into the night. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I pulled my coat tighter. The air was bitter, but it was nothing compared to the bitterness in my chest. Still, I didn't falter. My hand found my phone in my pocket, and without hesitation, I dialed. 1 ring, 2. Then a familiar voice answered, steady and professional. "It's time," I said simply. That was all. That was enough. Because the man on the other end already knew what that meant. The lawyer who had been with me through thick and thin, who had the papers, the accounts, the deeds all tucked away where greedy hands could never reach. I ended the call, slipping the phone back into my pocket, and lifted my eyes toward the glowing windows of the house behind me. Inside, I could see them still gathered, laughing awkwardly. Clara's sharp face turned in my direction, even though she couldn't see me. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally driven a wedge so deep between me and my son that there was no going back. She had no idea what was coming, because what none of them realized, not Daniel, not Clara, not even the others sitting in that dining room pretending not to choke on the tension, was that everything they had, everything they flaunted, was mine. I had given them everything. And if I wanted to, I could take it all back in a single stroke. But before I explain the depths of my revenge, before I take you through the unraveling of the lies and entitlement that destroyed my family, I need to tell you why their betrayal cut so deeply. You need to know what I sacrificed, what I gave, and how I stood by them when no one else would. Because betrayal is not born in one night. It is watered with years of sacrifice. It grows in the soil of loyalty taken for granted, and it blooms when greed whispers louder than love. And my story, this story, began long before that Christmas night. Back when Daniel was still a boy. Back when I believed family meant something. Back when I would have given my last breath to see him smile. Daniel was born on a quiet spring morning, the kind where the world feels fresh and alive. I remember holding him for the first time, the weight of him so small yet so heavy with meaning. I promised myself then that no matter what, I would protect him, provide for him, give him a life better than the one I had. And I did, every step of the way. When his father walked out on us, Daniel was only 6. I still see the image in my mind. The slammed door, the suitcase rattling down the steps, the echo of my husband's voice saying he couldn't do this anymore. I had no choice but to become both mother and father, to carry the weight of 2 people's responsibilities on my own back. There were nights I worked until my hands blistered, cleaning houses in the morning and working late at the diner. I'd stumble home, exhausted, to find Daniel asleep at the kitchen table, homework spread out beneath his head. I would cover him with a blanket and tell myself it was worth it. Every ache, every sacrifice, it was all worth it for him. When he was 10, he wanted to play baseball. We couldn't afford the uniform, let alone the fees, but I found a way. I skipped meals, I walked to work instead of taking the bus, I cleaned an extra office building at night just to scrape together the money. The look on his face when he stood there in that uniform, cap tilted too big for his head. It made me forget the hunger, the pain in my feet, the long nights without rest. And when he graduated high school, Daniel wanted to go to college. He was smart, ambitious, but we had nothing. No savings, no family support, just me, working myself to the bone. So I sold the only thing of value I had left, my mother's ring, the last piece of her I had. I pawned it without hesitation. I can still see the way the jeweler turned it over in his hands, appraising it coldly, unaware that it was more than gold, more than a stone. It was love. Legacy. But Daniel needed it more, and I gave it up gladly. He got into college, the first in our family. I took out loans, worked double shifts, did everything in my power to make sure he stayed there. Every dollar I earned went straight to tuition, books, rent. There were months I lived on instant noodles and black coffee so he wouldn't have to. I told myself it didn't matter if I went without. What mattered was that he had a chance. And when he called me years later, voice trembling with excitement, to tell me he had met the woman he wanted to marry, I smiled through tears. "Bring her home," I said. "Let me meet the one who makes my son's eyes light up like that." Her name was Clara. Beautiful, polished, with a smile that seemed warm at first, but never quite reached her eyes. I tried to welcome her, tried to be the mother-in-law she deserved. But even then, even in the early days, I sensed something lurking beneath the surface. She came from a family that looked down on people like me, people who scrubbed floors for a living, people with calloused hands and worn shoes. I saw the way her lips tightened when I served food on chipped plates, the way she glanced around my modest home as though it was something she had to endure. But Daniel loved her. And that was enough for me. Or at least I wanted it to be. The wedding was grander than anything I could afford, but I made it happen. I cashed out part of my retirement savings, money I had scraped together over decades, just to make sure my son's special day wasn't overshadowed by what we lacked. I paid for the dress, the flowers, even part of the honeymoon. I told myself it was what any loving parent would do, that this was the moment I had been working toward my whole life, to see my child step into happiness, secure and proud. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Daniel stopped calling as often. Clara's voice was always in the background, reminding him he was busy, that he didn't have time. When I visited, she made me feel like an intruder, as though I were a shadow clinging too tightly to the edges of their perfect life. And yet, I continued to give. When they wanted to buy a house, they didn't have the down payment. Who do you think gave it to them? Me, quietly, without complaint. I liquidated savings I had been holding on to, the money I had promised myself would one day allow me to rest. I gave it to them because Daniel wanted it, because he deserved it, because family comes first. When Daniel wanted to start his own business, I believed in him. I co-signed the loan. I invested what little I had left, even though it meant risking my own future. And when Clara insisted they deserved a bigger house, a nicer car, better things, I swallowed my pride and helped again. Every step, every sacrifice, I told myself it was love. That love meant giving without expecting anything in return, that my joy came from his joy. But slowly that joy faded. The phone calls became fewer, the visits shorter, until the only time I heard from Daniel was when they needed something. Money, support, sacrifice. I became a bank, not a mother, a tool to be used, not a person to be loved. And yet I never stopped. I kept giving. Because I remembered the little boy in the baseball uniform, the young man calling me from college, the son who once hugged me and said, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you. That memory was what kept me going, until Christmas, until the night he looked me in the eyes, surrounded by the family I had built, sitting in the house my money had bought, and told me I was no longer family. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I had been a fool, blind, but no more. That night, as the snow fell outside and my son's words rang in my ears, I made a silent vow. If they wanted to erase me, to strip me from their lives as though I were nothing, then I would show them what nothing truly looked like. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my small apartment, the one bedroom I'd moved to after giving up my house so Daniel and Clara could have more room, and listened to the radiator knock like an old heart. The glow of the street lamp cut a thin rectangle across my ceiling. I watched it until dawn began to rinse the darkness away, and when the grey light finally touched my window, I got up and made coffee with hands that didn't shake. I had made a vow in the snow. Now I would keep it. The first call, the one I made in the icy dark outside their house, was to Mr. Patel. He had handled everything for me over the years, wills, deeds, business papers I never expected to sign but did anyway, because that's what you do when your son says he has a dream and you say you believe in him. We proceed, I'd told him on Christmas. He knew what that meant, because a month before, after the first time Clara locked me out of their house with that smooth, practiced smile, I'd sat in Mr. Patel's office and said, "I want to build a wall they can't see until they run into it." He had looked at me over his glasses and nodded. "Then we'll start with what is yours." So, in those pale morning hours after Christmas, I opened the folder I kept in the top drawer of my dresser. Receipts, emails, deeds, the house, title in a trust with my name as trustee and sole grantor. Clara had insisted the house be gifted, but Mr. Patel had counselled me carefully, and I had listened the way a woman with nothing left to lose listens. The business, a line of credit I had guaranteed, and an investment I had made in the form of a secured note, quietly filed, quietly accruing. They had never asked how their credit line stayed open when clients paid late, or when Daniel reinvested money in marketing that looked suspiciously like weekend trips with Clara's friends. They never asked, so I never told. But I always kept the papers. I took out my phone and called Mr. Patel again. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning," he said. "I expected your call." "Do it," I said. "All of it." There was a small pause, not of doubt, but of careful attention. "We will need to serve notice for the note. 30 days to cure. On the property you can revoke occupancy privileges immediately as trustee, but I suggest we do it with a marshal rather than a locksmith. I want it clean," I said. "Legal, documented. I want the truth to do the work so I don't have to lift a finger." He exhaled softly. "I'll draw up everything today." I made oatmeal. I ate half and threw the rest away. Then I put on my coat and went to work. Work, for me, was the library. I'd taken a part-time job shelving books 2 years earlier because my body could no longer handle scrubbing floors, and because being surrounded by quiet felt like grace. The library smelled of paper and polish. When the doors clicked open that morning, the cold followed a few patrons inside, their faces pink, their hands gloved. I nodded to the young librarian at the desk, who always greeted me with a soft, "Good morning, miss." Ramirez like my name mattered. I shelved returns and hummed a song my mother used to sing while darning socks. Every few minutes my mind would flash with images from the night before. Clara's raised chin, Daniel's averted eyes, the clinking glasses, the hush after his words. And I would feel my stomach turn. But I let the memory pass through me like a storm through bare branches. If I held on to it, it would rot me from the inside. I wouldn't let them have that. At noon I took my break and sat by the window. Snow fluttered like ash. My phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Patel. "Drafts ready by 3, can you come sign?" I replied. Yes. Another message chimed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then opened it. It was from Clara. We'll send someone by to pick up our gifts you left behind. Don't come over again without asking. Boundaries. I stared at the word. Boundaries. The audacity of it struck me so sharply that I laughed out loud, a sound that startled the man reading a newspaper nearby. I typed and erased 3 responses before settling on none. Silence, I was learning, is sometimes the sharpest blade. At 3 I sat across from Mr. Patel, the afternoon sun weak and watery through the blinds. He slid papers across the desk. This is the demand letter on the note. It gives 30 days to pay the outstanding principal plus interest. This is the notice revoking their occupancy privileges effective immediately, as you are the trustee of the property trust that holds title. And this is a letter informing the business landlord that the guarantor, also you, will not extend comfort letters without seeing current financials. He tapped each document with a neat fingernail. You said clean. This is clean. I read every line. Slowly, carefully. Not because I doubted him, but because I needed to feel each step as it set beneath me, like a staircase appearing in front of my feet. When I finished, I signed. My signature looked steadier than I felt. Service? I asked. I've scheduled a process server for this evening. He said, tomorrow morning I will file the notices with the court. No surprises, only procedures. Thank you. He paused. You don't have to thank me for protecting what you built. On my way home, I stopped at the grocery store to buy milk. I had just placed it on the counter when my phone rang. Daniel. For a heartbeat, my chest warmed like it always had when I saw his name. Then I remembered. Mum, he said, skipping any greeting. Clara just got an email from some lawyer. About the house? What is this? I placed a carton of eggs on the counter. It's a notice, I said, stating I'm revoking your occupancy. You and Clara need to vacate within 72 hours so I can inspect and secure the property. He laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. You can't do that. I can, I said, and I am. Why would you? Mum, we were all just upset last night. You're making this into something it doesn't need to be. Last night, I said, you told me I wasn't family. I heard you clearly. I didn't mean, Clara didn't mean, look, can we talk about this in person? You can't just throw us out. It's Christmas. I'm not throwing you out, I said, and I realized it was true. I'm taking back my keys. He was quiet for a beat. So this is revenge? Is that it? I paid the cashier, who kept her eyes politely lowered. Call it what you like, I said. I call it clarity. Mom, Daniel, I said, and I could hear the steadiness in my voice, a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. When you're ready to speak to me with respect, you can call again. But until then, correspond through Mr. Patel. I hung up. I stood on the sidewalk, the wind threading through my scarf, the sky already dimming. I felt something loosen in my chest, something old and tight. It wasn't joy, it wasn't triumph. It was space, space to breathe. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened an old shoebox. Inside were photographs. Daniel with frosting on his nose from his 5th birthday. Daniel in his cap and gown. Daniel dancing with me at his wedding while Clara watched from the edge of the floor, lips pressed together. I ran a finger over his face in each picture. A mother's hand knows every angle of her child's smile. I whispered a small prayer, not for him to be spared, but for him to be changed by what was coming. Sometimes mercy looks like consequence. The next morning, the process server did his work. Papers were delivered, phones lit up. By noon, my sister called, breathless. What did you do? What I had to do, I said. He's your son. She murmured. I know, I said, and I am his mother. Not his victim. At 3, the first message from Daniel arrived. We need more time. The second, Clara says your lawyer is wrong. The third, you wouldn't do this to your own grandchild. That one, I answered. I will always help my grandchildren. I wrote, with food, school, and love. But I won't fund cruelty silence again. Evening came. I fixed soup and turned on the radio. A car engine idled outside my building, then shut off. A knock at the door. I opened it to find Daniel on the threshold, shoulders hunched in his expensive coat, eyes rimmed red as if he hadn't slept. Mom, he said, almost a whisper. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He came in and stood in my tiny living room, looking like a man who had just seen the edge of something he'd thought was endless. He looked at the framed photo on my bookshelf. Him and me at the beach, his arm thrown around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. I was angry, he said. Clara's parents were there. I felt... He swallowed. I felt caught between two worlds. And you chose, I said. He looked at me, and for a second, the boy he had been peered through the man he had become. What if I made a mistake? Then you'll learn from it, I said. But you won't learn if you don't feel it. He sat. His hands were restless, moving, clasping, releasing. We can't move out in 3 days, he said. The business is going through a rough patch. We have inventory coming. If we move, we'll lose the shipments. We'll lose everything. I held his gaze. You won't lose what is real. Please, he whispered. I'm asking you as your son. The words landed heavy. This is where, in the past, I would have melted. I would have said yes, of course, take what you need, take it all. But I remembered the sound of my chair scraping the floor on Christmas night, remembered the cool air on my face, the call in the dark, the vow I had made to stop feeding the fire that consumed me. I will give you one kindness, I said. I will allow you access to the house for 7 days to remove your personal belongings, provided you sign an acknowledgement that the property, all furnishings and the land are held by the trust, and that you have no ownership claim. The trust will engage an inspector on the 8th day. If there is damage, the costs will be deducted from any support I decide to offer in the future. For the children, not for you. For the business, the note is due in 30 days. Pay it, and you keep your pride. Don't, and the collateral will be collected. He stared at me. You sound like a stranger. No, I said softly. I finally sound like myself. He stood. Clara will be furious. I imagine she already is. He took a breath, held it, let it out. Okay, he said. Send the paper. I'll sign. 7 days. He moved to the door, then stopped. Do you hate me? I felt the question like a bruise I refused to press. I don't hate you, I said. I won't ever hate you. But I won't stand where you want me to stand anymore. After he left, I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. There were tears. I let them fall. Not the hopeless tears of a person who has lost everything, but the clean, necessary tears of a person who has finally started to hold her own shape. In the days that followed, the house transformed from theirs back to mine. Movers came and went. A truck idled in the driveway, while a Christmas wreath still hung crookedly on the front door. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. On the 4th day, I arrived with the inspector and walked through the rooms I had never really left, only lent. Light slanted across the hardwood. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner. In the nursery, a white crib stood against the wall, a small mobile turning slowly in the draught. I ran my fingertips along the railing and said a silent promise to the grandchild who would always have a place with me. Downstairs, Clara stood with her arms folded, talking in a voice that could slice glass. My parents are furious, she said. They say we should fight you. You can try, I said. Bring your lawyer. Bring your parents. Bring anyone who thinks paper lies. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. I looked around my own kitchen. The cabinets I had paid for, the window I had insisted face the morning light, the fruit bowl I had bought at a flea market and left for them on moving day because I thought it would make the house feel like home. I regret many things, I said. This isn't one of them. She smiled then, a brittle, dangerous curve. You may have the house, but you don't have Daniel. I tilted my head. I never did. I said, I had a boy who loved me. The man will have to decide for himself. She turned away, a sharp pivot of heel, and I saw the crack in her poise. Fear. It pulsed like a heartbeat behind her anger. Greed always fears the day the basket is taken away. On the 7th day, Daniel signed the acknowledgement. On the 8th, the inspector finished his report. Wear and tear, he said, nothing more. I nodded, grateful in a small, tender way. I changed the locks. I stood on the porch in the winter noon and breathed in the cold air that smelled faintly of pine and promise. My phone buzzed with a new message. A client of Daniel's, someone I'd met briefly at a fundraiser. Is it true? Are you pulling out? We should talk. The web was beginning to tremble. When you tug the strand at the center, everything feels it. I tucked my phone away and walked to the gate. The street was quiet. A child rode a scooter in a snowsuit, his mother calling after him to slow down. I thought about Daniel at that age, knees scabbed, hair sticking up, eyes bright with a trust I once thought unbreakable. I thought about what it takes for a mother to let a son fall. It is not cruelty. It is faith in the ground to teach him. That night I slept. Deeply. When I woke, there was a new text on my phone, unknown number, early hour. We should meet. There are things you should know about your daughter-in-law. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The sender signed a single initial, L. I looked out the window at the thin thread of dawn and felt the next step of the staircase settle under my foot. The message sat on my phone like a stone in my pocket all morning. I reread it again and again. We should meet. There are things you should know about your daughter-in-law. At first, I thought it might be a mistake, a wrong number, but my instincts told me otherwise. Clara had many enemies. Most people like her did. Entitlement leaves a trail, and sometimes the trail leads back. By noon, curiosity had become too sharp to ignore. I replied with 3 simple words, where and when. Within minutes, the answer came back. Cafe on Maple, 2 p.m. I knew the place. Small, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore, the kind of cafe where nobody looked twice at you, where secrets could be poured like coffee into a chipped mug. At 2 o'clock sharp, I walked in. The bell above the door jingled softly. The cafe smelled of espresso and cinnamon, the air heavy with the sound of milk steaming and spoons clinking. In the back corner sat a woman in her late 30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, coat buttoned to her neck. She looked up, her eyes sharp and assessing. She lifted a hand slightly. You're here, she said. I slid into the chair across from her. I'm here. And you are? Laura, she said. Clara's former business partner. I blinked. Business partner? She leaned forward. Clara never told you about our venture, did she? Of course not. She doesn't like people knowing when she fails. The waitress came by and we ordered coffee. When she left, Laura continued, voice low but steady. 2 years ago, Clara came to me with an idea for a boutique business, something flashy, something she claimed would take off quickly. She said Daniel had investors lined up, that she had backing, that I'd be safe if I put money in. I was foolish enough to believe her. I poured in my savings. All of it, my stomach tightened. What happened? Laura's smile was brittle. What always happens when Clara's involved? The money vanished into thin air. Marketing costs, she called it. Networking events. Vacations, really. Designer clothes. Dinners out. When I pressed, she turned vicious. Told me I was small-minded, that I lacked vision. By the time I realized I'd been conned, the account was empty. She walked away without a scratch. The coffee arrived, steaming hot. I wrapped my hands around the mug, trying to steady myself. "And Daniel?" I asked softly. "Blind," Laura said flatly. She wrapped him around her little finger. He signed things without reading them, trusted her every word. I tried to warn him once. He told me not to bad-mouth his wife. I closed my eyes for a moment. The pieces clicked too easily. The expensive cars, the renovations, the constant need for more money. It wasn't just greed. It was a pattern, a cycle of taking until there was nothing left, then moving on to the next victim. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Laura sipped her coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "Because I saw the notice." Word gets around in business circles. Clara's panicking. She's been reaching out, trying to cover her tracks, and when she's desperate, she makes mistakes. I thought you should know the kind of person she really is. You're not just her mother-in-law, you're her bankroll, and when you stop feeding her, she'll burn Daniel to keep herself warm. Her words sliced through me, brutal in their truth. I thought of Daniel, exhausted at my door, begging for time. I thought of Clara's smirk in the kitchen, the venom in her voice. My son was drowning, and he didn't even see who was tying the weights around his ankles. I leaned forward, my voice a whisper. "Do you have proof?" Laura's eyes glittered. "Copies of contracts, bank transfers, emails. I've kept everything. One day I thought I'd take her to court, but lawsuits cost money I don't have. You, on the other hand." I sat back, heart pounding. Proof! Concrete evidence that Clara wasn't just manipulative, but fraudulent. It was more than revenge now. It was justice. We arranged to meet again later that week so she could hand over the documents. As I left the cafe, snowflakes clung to my hair, the cold air stinging my cheeks. But inside, I burned with a fire I hadn't felt in years. That night, Daniel called again. His voice was strained, frayed at the edges. "Mom, Clara's furious. She says you're trying to ruin us. She says—" "Daniel," I interrupted gently, "do you trust me?" He hesitated. "You're my mother." Of course No, I said firmly. "Do you trust me enough to see the truth, even if it hurts?" The silence on the other end stretched long. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know." I closed my eyes. "Then I'll show you. And after that, you'll have to choose." The next few days moved like a tide. Clara stormed into Mr. Patel's office demanding explanations, but his calm professionalism battered her words away like flies. She called me, left voicemails laced with venom, each one more desperate than the last. "You think you're clever? You think you can control us? You're pathetic. Daniel doesn't need you. No one does. But with every insult, every threat, I only grew more certain." She was unraveling. And soon everyone would see the threads for what they were. On Friday, I met Laura again. This time in her small apartment, stacks of papers spread across her coffee table. Bank statements, contracts with Clara's signature, emails dripping with arrogance and deception. I combed through them slowly, my hands trembling, but my mind sharp. Each page was another nail in the coffin of Clara's facade. Laura watched me, her expression hard. "I want nothing from you," she said, "except one thing. Make sure she doesn't do this to anyone else." I nodded. "She won't." When I left, I carried the box of evidence close to my chest, as though it were fragile glass. In truth, it was stronger than steel. That evening I sat in my apartment, the box on the table, the clock ticking loud in the silence. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like power. Not the shallow power of money given and taken, but the quiet, steady power of truth. I thought of Daniel again, the boy who had once believed I could fix anything. I whispered into the stillness. This time I will. Because now it wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about saving him from the woman who was destroying him. And when the time came to confront them both, I would have the truth in my hands, undeniable and unshakable. And Clara, poor Clara, she would never see it coming. The house felt different once the locks were changed. The echoes of their voices were gone, replaced by the hum of the furnace and the quiet creaks of wood settling in the winter air. I walked from room to room, my footsteps soft against the floors, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't trespassing in my own life. But peace never lasts long when you're standing on the fault line of betrayal. 3 days after Laura gave me the box of documents, Daniel showed up again. No Clara this time. Just Daniel, standing on the porch like a boy with nowhere left to run. He was pale, his eyes ringed dark, his posture slumped as though the weight of the world had finally pressed him down. I opened the door, hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in slowly, scanning the familiar space with a strange detachment, as if it were already slipping out of his grasp. "It's quiet here," he said, almost wistful. "It always was," I replied. "You just didn't hear it over the noise Clara brought with her." His shoulders tensed. "Don't start." I gestured to the living room. He sat down on the couch, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, his hands twisted together, restless, nervous. "Mom, things are bad." I stayed standing. "How bad?" He swallowed hard. "The business is drowning. The loan payments, we're behind. Suppliers are threatening to cut us off. And now, with the house, Clara says you're trying to destroy us." I took a slow breath, then walked to the dining table where the box of documents still sat. I pulled it closer, the cardboard edges rough under my palms. "Daniel, do you remember when you were little, and you'd come to me with your homework? You'd hand me the paper, and I'd tell you to read it aloud, because when you hear the words, 'the mistakes jump out'?" He blinked at me. "What does that—" "Sit," I said, pulling out a chair. Reluctantly, he joined me at the table. I opened the box and laid out the first contract. His name was scrawled on the signature line, but the clauses above it were written in Clara's words, binding him to debts and obligations he didn't even know he had. His brow furrowed as he scanned the page. I don't remember signing this." "Because you didn't read it," I said gently. "You trusted her?" I laid down another paper, then another. Bank transfers from the supposed business account into Clara's personal account. Lavish purchases disguised as expenses. Emails to Laura dripping with manipulation, full of promises Clara never intended to keep. Daniel's hands shook as he read. His lips moved, forming silent words, disbelief spilling across his face. This can't be right." "She wouldn't." "She did," I said firmly, "over and over again." He shoved the papers back, as though they might burn him. "You don't understand." "Clara loves me. She said, 'Love doesn't drain you dry.'" I interrupted. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften it. "Love doesn't lie to your face and use your name to sign debts you can't pay. Love doesn't cut your mother out at Christmas to prove a point." His jaw clenched. Tears brimmed in his eyes, though he fought them back. "If this is true, if any of this is true," his voice cracked, "then I've been living in a lie." I reached across the table, covering his trembling hands with mine. "You've been living in her lie. But lies don't last forever. Truth has a way of breaking through, no matter how hard people try to bury it." For a long moment, Daniel just sat there, shoulders heaving with silent breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "What do I do?" I pulled back my hands, steeling myself. You face it. With me. But it won't be easy. Clara won't let go without a fight. She'll drag you down if it means she doesn't drown alone. He shook his head slowly, as though the words were too heavy to carry. I thought I was building something. I thought we were building a family. You were, I said softly. But she was building a facade. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Finally, Daniel pushed the papers back into the box and stood. His eyes were red, but his voice was steadier than before. I need time. You don't have much, I warned. 30 days on the note, 7 are already gone. I know, he said. He walked to the door, paused, then turned back. If what you're saying is true, if these papers are real... He swallowed hard. Then I've been a fool. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him into my arms like when he was a boy, to promise him it would all be okay. But I didn't. Because promises had been his prison. It was time he faced freedom, even if it hurt. After he left, I sat alone at the table, the box of evidence between my hands. The house around me was quiet, but inside me a storm raged. I knew Clara wouldn't go quietly, and when she struck back, she would aim to wound. I didn't have to wait long. The very next day I received a letter, not from Clara but from her parents. A thick envelope with embossed lettering, the kind of stationery meant to intimidate. Inside was a letter from their lawyer, demanding I rescind the notices, accusing me of malicious intent, and threatening to sue for emotional distress if I didn't comply. I laughed when I finished reading it. Out loud. Alone in my kitchen, I laughed until my sides ached, because their threats meant nothing against the truth. But it also told me something else. Clara wasn't just fighting for Daniel. She was fighting for the lifestyle my sacrifices had given her. And she wasn't going to let it go without trying to bury me. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and set it aside. I didn't even bother calling Mr. Patel that night. I knew what he'd say. Empty threats. Paper tigers. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in the living room, and stared at the Christmas tree I hadn't taken down yet. Its lights blinked softly, casting shadows on the walls. For the first time, those lights didn't feel like a symbol of joy. They felt like a countdown. And I was ready. Because Clara thought she was playing a game of power. She thought she could twist Daniel's heart, rally her parents' money, and paint me as the villain. But I had the one thing she could never counterfeit. The truth. And I was going to let the whole world see it. Daniel didn't come home that night. At least that's what the neighbors told me later. His car sat in the driveway until well past midnight. Lights off, but no one went inside. I imagined him sitting there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house that was no longer his, torn between the woman he married and the truth laid bare before him. I knew he was unraveling, but I also knew Clara wouldn't allow him the space to face it. She would press harder, sink her claws deeper, because that's what people like her did when they felt power slipping away. The following morning, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Ramirez, a male voice asked. Yes, who's this? This is Officer Duncan. We've received a report filed against you. Accusations of harassment and unlawful eviction. I'd like you to come down to the station to clear this up. For a moment, I simply sat there in silence, my knuckles white around the phone. Then I laughed bitterly. Clara, of course. Officer, everything I've done is documented. The property is in a trust under my name, and I followed every legal step with my attorney. If they're claiming otherwise, I suggest you look closely at their paperwork before you waste my time. There was a pause on the line. So you're saying you have the deeds, the trust documentation, and legal representation? I have everything, I said coldly. and if you'd like, I can bring copies today." "No need, ma'am," he said quickly, his voice softening. "We'll close this file. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." As I hung up, a wave of anger mixed with grim satisfaction coursed through me. Clara was panicking, and desperate people make sloppy moves. That afternoon, Daniel came by again. This time his eyes were darker, his shoulders stiff, his movements sharp and restless. He didn't sit down when I offered. He paced the living room like a caged animal. "Clara says you're trying to humiliate us," he began. "She says you're making things up to tear us apart." I crossed my arms. "Do you believe her?" His pacing slowed. He looked at me, lips trembling slightly. I don't know what to believe anymore. I walked to the table, opened the box again, and slid a stack of emails toward him. "Then believe the words she wrote herself." He snatched them up, skimmed them, his eyes darting across the page. Slowly, his face drained of color. These are real." "Yes." He dropped the papers back into the box as if they were toxic. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Why didn't I see it?" "Because you loved her," I said gently. "And love can be blind. But blindness doesn't excuse betrayal. Now you have to decide whether you'll keep wearing the blindfold or open your eyes." He sat heavily on the couch, head in his hands. "If I walk away, I lose everything." "No," I said. "If you stay, you lose yourself." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel rose, walked to the door, and without looking back, muttered, "I need to think." 2 nights later, Clara showed up. She didn't bother knocking. She pounded on the door until I opened it. Her face was twisted with fury, her coat unbuttoned despite the biting cold. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, pushing past me into the house, turning Daniel against me. "Waving around your fake papers, trying to destroy our marriage. You've always been jealous." I shut the door behind her calmly. "Jealous?" "Of what, Clara? Of the way you leech off others? Of the lies you spin until even you can't keep track?" Her eyes narrowed. "You're a bitter old woman clinging to power." "Daniel belongs with me. He doesn't need you. He never did." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "If you truly believed that, you wouldn't be standing here screaming in my kitchen. You're scared. And you should be." For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw the flicker of panic beneath the rage, the way her hands trembled before she clenched them into fists. Then she sneered, covering her fear with venom. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "I regret giving you the benefit of the doubt for as long as I did." She turned sharply, stormed to the door, and slammed it behind her so hard the frame rattled. I stood in the silence that followed, breathing slowly, letting the calm return. The storm was building. I could feel it pressing at the edges of everything. But I was ready, because this time I wasn't the one trembling. This time I wasn't the victim. This time I had the truth. Daniel called me just after midnight. His voice was low, broken, like a man who had finally stumbled into the dark truth he'd been avoiding. "Mum," he whispered, "I can't sleep. Clara's screaming at me every time I ask questions. She says the documents you showed me are forged, but I know her. I hear it in her tone. She's lying." I sat up in bed, listening to the silence of my apartment, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room. "Then you already have your answer, Daniel. The truth is what your gut tells you when the noise quiets down." He exhaled shakily. "I think I've ruined my life." "You haven't," I said softly. "You've just been living someone else's version of it. You can take it back, but you have to act before she drags you down with her." There was silence, then a soft, bitter laugh. She told me tonight that if I choose you, I'll lose everything. The house, the business, even the kids. She said she'll make sure I end up with nothing. My grip on the phone tightened. That's not love, Daniel. That's control, and control is not worth saving. The line went quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. What do I do? First, I said, you stop signing anything she puts in front of you. Second, you come to Mr. Patel's office tomorrow. I'll have him explain exactly what your name is tied to and what it isn't. And third, I hesitated, but then let the words spill out like a final card on the table. You decide which side you're on. Hers or the truth. The call ended, and I sat in the dark for a long while, staring at the faint outline of the curtains in the moonlight. I wanted to believe my son was strong enough to choose wisely. But I also knew how deep her hooks were. The next morning, Daniel walked into Mr. Patel's office with his shoulders hunched, his eyes downcast. Clara wasn't with him. I saw that as the first small victory. Mr. Patel went over everything. The trust, the secured note, the loan guarantees. Daniel listened, pale, nodding slowly as each piece fell into place. So she's been tying my name to her debts without me realizing. He muttered. She's been tying your life to her lies. I corrected. Mr. Patel slid the acknowledgement document across the desk. Sign this, and you officially separate yourself from any ownership claim on the house. That's your mother's property. The business, however, will rise or fall on whether the secured note is repaid. Daniel signed, his signature shaky, but final. He looked at me afterward, eyes filled with something between shame and gratitude. I didn't think I'd ever be the kind of man who needed saving. He whispered, You don't. I said gently. You just need to stop letting yourself be destroyed. For a brief moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who believed his mother could fix anything. My heart ached, but I pushed the feeling down. This wasn't the time for sentiment. That evening, Clara made her move. She arrived at my apartment door with her parents in tow, their polished coats gleaming, their faces twisted with disdain. Clara was the one who spoke first, her voice cold and rehearsed. We're here to tell you that this ends now. Daniel is our family. You're nothing but a bitter old woman trying to poison him against us. Her mother sneered, adding, You should be ashamed of yourself, dragging lawyers into what should be a family matter. I didn't flinch. I held their stares with a calm I didn't know I still possessed. Shame? I said softly. Shame is lying. Shame is stealing. Shame is using the people who love you until there's nothing left. I don't feel shame. But perhaps you should. Clara's father stepped forward, his voice booming. If you don't back down, we'll bury you in court. You think your little papers mean anything? We have money. We have influence. You can't win against us. I smiled faintly, tilting my head. You're welcome to try. But unlike you, I don't deal in illusions. I deal in truth. And truth has a way of cutting through money like it's nothing. Clara's face flushed red, her mask cracking. She lunged a step forward, her voice trembling with rage. You'll regret this. You'll lose Daniel forever. I stepped closer, so close I could see the fury blazing in her eyes. No, Clara. The only thing I've lost is the patience to keep feeding your greed. And soon, everyone else will see you for who you really are. They left in a storm of anger, the echo of their footsteps fading down the hall. I closed the door quietly, my hands steady. The war had officially begun. But I wasn't afraid, because for the first time in years I wasn't fighting alone. Daniel was beginning to wake up. And soon the world would know exactly who Clara really was. Daniel didn't come by the house for 3 days. I didn't call him, didn't chase after him, didn't beg him to see sense. I had done enough of that in the past, pouring myself into empty cups. This time I waited. If he was going to step into the light, it had to be his choice. On the 4th evening, as the snow outside piled up in heavy drifts, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Daniel stood there with his children, my grandchildren, clinging to his coat. Their little faces were flushed from the cold, their eyes wide with confusion. Daniel looked like a man who hadn't slept, his jaw rough with stubble, his eyes sunken but clear. "Can we stay here tonight?" he asked. His voice was low, trembling, but steady enough that I knew something had shifted. I moved aside without a word. The children rushed in, peeling off mittens and scarves, their laughter bouncing off the walls like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. I caught Daniel's eye as he stepped in last, and he whispered so softly I almost didn't hear it. I told her I was done. My heart clenched, but I didn't embrace him. Not yet. I simply nodded. "There's room here," I said. That night I tucked the children into the spare room, blankets piled high to keep them warm. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. The silence between us was heavy, but not hostile, more like the silence before dawn. Finally, he spoke. "She screamed at me when I brought up the documents," he admitted. "Said I was weak, said I let you control me." She even threw a glass. It shattered against the wall, inches from the kids. His hands tightened into fists. That was the moment I knew. I can't keep pretending I listened without interrupting. His voice cracked as he went on. "I don't know who I am without her. But I know who I'll become if I stay. With her, I'll turn into someone I hate. Someone my kids will grow up fearing." He looked up at me then, eyes glistening. "I don't want that, Mum. I don't want to lose myself." For the first time in years, I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Then you won't." "You've already taken the first step." His shoulders shook, silent tears slipping down his face. And though I ached to pull him into my arms, I let him cry like the grown man he was, not the little boy I used to comfort. Sometimes love means letting someone feel the full weight of their choices. The next morning, Clara called. Her voice was high, shrill, laced with fury. "How dare you take him from me? You're poisoning his mind. He's mine, do you hear me? Mine!" I let her rant, her words spilling out like venom. When she finally stopped for breath, I spoke calmly. "Clara, Daniel is not a possession. He's a man. And if he chooses to leave, that's not theft. That's freedom," she screamed, a raw, unhinged sound, and hung up. The war had reached its breaking point. But now I had Daniel by my side, his children under my roof, and a mountain of proof that Clara's world was nothing but smoke and mirrors. The time had come not just to defend what was mine, but to expose her to everyone she had deceived. And when the truth came out, it would be loud enough to silence even Clara. The first shot didn't come from Clara. It came from the whispers. Whispers at Daniel's workplace, at the suppliers he once shook hands with, at the neighbors who used to wave from their porches. Clara was already spinning her story, painting me as the bitter, jealous mother who couldn't let her son grow up. She told anyone who would listen that I had stolen the house out of spite, that I had falsified documents, that I was trying to break apart a happy marriage, because I couldn't stand not being in control. Daniel heard it from his business partner first. "Clara says your mum's unwell," the man told him, lowering his voice like he was speaking of something shameful. "That she's confused. That she's making things up." Daniel didn't answer him. He just left the room, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. That evening, he sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers Laura had given us, the evidence of Clara's fraud. "She's out there smearing your name, Mom. And people believe her. They always believe her because she knows how to smile while she lies. I poured him tea, sliding the cup in front of him. Then it's time we stop hiding. If the world wants a show, let's give them the truth instead of her fiction. He looked up at me, uncertain. You mean public? Yes, I said firmly. Court filings are public record. Her transfers, her contracts, her lies, all of it. If she wants to drag my name through the mud, then let her do it standing in the shadow of her own fraud. Daniel swallowed hard. She'll hate me for this. She already does, I said softly. She hates anything she can't control. And right now, that's you, 2 days later, with Mr. Patel's guidance, we filed suit. Breach of contract, fraudulent transfers, misuse of business funds. The list was long, each accusation supported by the documents Laura had meticulously saved. The papers were stamped, filed, and entered into the system. Once the wheels of the court began to turn, there was no stopping them. The day the notice was served, Clara stormed into Daniel's office in front of half his employees. She threw the papers at his desk, her voice shrill and cracking. "You're letting her ruin us. Don't you see? She's destroying everything we built." Daniel stood, calm but pale. "No, Clara. You destroyed it when you lied, when you stole her mouth opened and closed, desperate for another lie to throw, but the staff had already seen the documents scattered across his desk. They had already read the words fraudulent and misrepresentation. Whispers started before she even stormed out, her heels striking the floor like a drumbeat of defeat. That night, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number again. I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Ramirez." It was one of Daniel's suppliers, his voice uneasy. "We got the filings today." "Is it true? What she did?" I spoke steadily. "Every word is documented, every page signed by her hand. I didn't want it to come to this, but the truth doesn't hide forever." There was a pause. Then the man sighed. "We always wondered how she was affording all that. Guess we know now. Don't worry, ma'am. We'll stand by Daniel. He's a good man." I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet. It had begun. The web she spun so carefully was unraveling, thread by thread. Clara didn't take it quietly. She called me over and over, her voice hoarse with fury, her words venomous. "You think you've won? You haven't seen what I can do. I'll make Daniel hate you forever. I'll take those kids where you'll never find them. I'll bury you in legal fees until you're choking on your last dollar." But the more she raged, the calmer I became, because every threat she made only showed how desperate she was. And desperation was a crack in her armor. The next Sunday, Daniel came to me with the children. He sat in the living room while they played with blocks on the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. "Mom," he said, voice low. "If this goes all the way to court, the world will know everything. The lies, the fraud, the debt. Clara won't survive it. And part of me," his voice faltered, "part of me feels guilty." I looked at him carefully. "Do you feel guilty for protecting yourself? For protecting your children? For finally standing up to the person who's been using you?" He shook his head slowly, as if trying to shake loose the last chains of denial. "No, not anymore." I leaned back, my eyes on the children. "Then don't mistake consequence for cruelty. This isn't about revenge anymore, Daniel. It's about survival. Yours and theirs." As I spoke, his youngest toddled over and climbed into his lap, pressing a tiny hand against his chest. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he kissed his daughter's hair. "I don't want them to grow up thinking this is what love looks like." "Then show them the truth," I said softly. The wheels of justice were turning, and Clara was caught in them now. There was no stopping what was coming. The first hearing was scheduled within weeks. Clara arrived in a tailored coat, her parents flanking her like bodyguards, their expressions a mixture of outrage and superiority. She didn't look at me when we sat across from each other in the courtroom. She fixed her gaze on Daniel instead, her eyes sharp, willing him to break. But he didn't. When the judge called the case, Mr. Patel rose with calm authority. He presented the trust documents, the secured note, and then, slowly, methodically, the evidence Laura had provided. Each paper landed like a stone in water. Bank transfers showing money disappearing into Clara's personal accounts, contracts riddled with false statements, emails where she mocked those she deceived. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the judge's pen scratching across notes. Clara shifted in her seat, her face pale beneath the powder of her makeup. At one point she whispered furiously to her lawyer, who shook his head and muttered something back that made her slam her hand against the table. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his voice wavered at first, but grew steadier with each word. I signed things without reading them. I let my wife convince me not to ask questions. I thought I was building a future with her, but instead I was digging a hole. If not for my mother, I wouldn't have known until it was too late. Everything I thought was ours was built on lies. The judge's gaze lingered on Clara then, heavy and unmoving. Do you have a response to these documents? Clara's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client contests the authenticity. Then you'll need proof. The judge cut in, unimpressed, because from what I see here, the paper trail is very clear. The hearing ended with a continuation, but by then the damage was done. The gallery, filled with curious onlookers and a few reporters sniffing for a story, buzzed with whispers as Clara stalked out of the courtroom. Her parents followed, their faces tight with humiliation. Outside on the courthouse steps, Daniel stood beside me, his shoulders square for the first time in months. It's out now, he said quietly. Everyone knows. Yes, I replied, looking at the cluster of people whispering nearby. And that's only the beginning. The next morning, the local paper ran a headline, Businesswoman accused of fraud in family dispute. Clara's face was printed in full color, a smile frozen in a photo from some charity gala, now paired with words like embezzlement and misrepresentation. By noon, Daniel's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, old friends, even customers of the business. Most were sympathetic. Some were shocked. A few offered help. Clara, on the other hand, spiraled. She left messages on Daniel's phone, alternating between sobs and threats. How could you do this to me? To us. I'll never forgive you. You're nothing without me. You'll see. I'll drag your mother's name through the dirt until she wishes she'd never been born. But the more she screamed, the clearer the truth became to anyone who heard it. Clara wasn't a victim. She was unraveling. That weekend, Daniel brought the children again. We made pancakes in the morning, the little ones laughing as they smeared syrup across their plates. Daniel sat quietly, sipping his coffee, watching them with a look I hadn't seen in years. Peace. Mom, he said finally, I don't know what's going to happen next. But I know one thing. I don't regret leaving her. Not anymore. I smiled softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. That's all I needed to hear. Because Clara could scream, threaten, smear my name across every street corner in the city. But the truth was already loose, and the truth doesn't go back into hiding. And when the final confrontation came, it wouldn't be in whispers or behind closed doors. It would be out in the open, where everyone could see who she really was. The final confrontation began on a night that should have been ordinary. The children were asleep in the spare room, their soft breathing drifting through the hallway. Daniel and I sat in the living room, papers spread across the coffee table, going over the next court date. The air was calm, almost too calm, like the stillness before a storm. Then came the pounding on the door. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor. It was hard, frantic, fists slamming against wood with a violence that rattled the frame. Daniel froze, his eyes wide. I stood, my heart steady. "It's her," I said quietly. I opened the door, and there she was, clearer, wild-eyed, hair dishevelled, her coat half-buttoned, her breath fogging in the cold night air. Behind her, the shadows of her parents loomed at the curb, watching but not daring to follow her up the steps. "You think you've won?" she spat, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "You think you can take everything from me and just walk away?" Daniel rose slowly, his jaw tight. "Clara, you need to leave." She whirled on him, eyes blazing. "Leave? You want me to leave? After everything I gave you? After everything I built?" She jabbed a finger towards me. "This is her doing! She's poisoned you against me!" I closed the door calmly and leaned against it. "No, Clara. The only poison here has been yours, and the antidote is the truth." Her laugh was sharp, jagged. "Truth? You think those papers mean anything? You think people care about your pathetic little accusations?" "Daniel, listen to me. Without me, you're nothing. You're weak. You'd still be living in her dingy apartment if it weren't for me." Daniel's voice cut through the air, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "No, Clara. Without her, I'd be nothing. My mother gave me everything. You just took Clara's face twisted, a mixture of fury and desperation. You're throwing away your marriage, your family. Your children will hate you for this." The children stirred in the other room, a soft cry carrying down the hall. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the sound, and something hardened in his face. "No," he said firmly. "They'll grow up knowing the difference between love and manipulation. And I'll never let them confuse the two." She shook her head, tears streaming now, her voice breaking. "You'll regret this. Both of you. I'll make sure of it." I stepped forward then, my voice calm, cutting through her chaos. "Clara, you've already made sure of everything. The lies, the debts, the fraud. It's all out now. The world sees you for who you are. The only thing left is for you to decide whether you'll fight the truth or accept it." For a moment her mask cracked completely. I saw the fear in her eyes, raw and unhidden. Then she straightened, pulling her coat tighter, her voice trembling with rage. "This isn't over." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Through the window, I watched her march back to the curb, her parents scrambling after her, their once proud faces now pale with shame. Daniel sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "It feels like I've been holding my breath for years," he whispered. "And tonight, I finally let it out." I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not over yet. But you're free now, and that's the beginning." Outside, the night was silent again, but I knew the echoes of that confrontation would ripple far beyond our walls. Clara's downfall was no longer just a private matter. It was public, it was irreversible, and soon justice would arrive. Not with whispers, not with rage, but with the undeniable weight of truth. The news broke faster than I expected. A local journalist who had attended. The hearing published an article online, and by morning Clara's name was trending in the community. Headlines painted her not as a victim, but as a fraudster. Her smiling photograph, taken at some charity dinner months ago, sat cruelly beside phrases like misuse of funds and family deception. The comments poured in, neighbors, old acquaintances, even distant relatives, all stunned by the truth. Some admitted they'd always suspected something was off. Others expressed sympathy for Daniel, but for Clara the tide had turned. That afternoon, Daniel came home with his phone buzzing constantly in his pocket. "It's everywhere," he said, dropping it on the table. "Her name, her face. She's finished." He looked at me, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Part of me almost feels sorry for her. I shook my head slowly. Don't. Sorry is for people who made mistakes. She made choices that hurt you, hurt the children, hurt everyone she touched. She built her kingdom on lies, Daniel, and kingdoms built on lies always crumble. The doorbell rang not long after. When I opened it, I found 2 reporters standing there, notebooks in hand, cameras slung around their necks. Mrs. Ramirez? One asked politely. We'd like a statement if you're willing. I almost turned them away. But then I thought of Clara, her voice shrill with accusations, her lies already poisoning the air. No more. It was time the truth was told plainly, without her spin. I stepped outside, the cold air biting my cheeks. I have one statement, I said clearly. Family is built on love and sacrifice. I gave both, freely, for years. What I received in return was betrayal and deceit. I don't regret standing up for myself. And I hope anyone who has been used or manipulated by those they trusted finds the strength to do the same. The reporters scribbled furiously. One lifted a camera. The flash went off, and I didn't flinch. That night, Clara's parents called Daniel. I overheard some of the conversation from the kitchen. Their voices were frantic, begging him to reconsider, to settle, to stop the bleeding before their family's reputation was destroyed completely. Daniel's voice was calm, unshaken. You should have thought about that before you defended her lies, he said simply, before hanging up. The silence afterward was heavy, but it was a clean silence, not the poisoned one we had lived in for so long. Days passed, and the pressure only mounted on Clara. Businesses cut ties, friends stopped answering her calls. Even the neighbors, once charmed by her smile, now crossed the street to avoid her. She was alone, surrounded by the walls she had built with her own arrogance. Then came the final blow. Mr. Patel called with news. The court had granted a freeze on Clara's accounts pending investigation. Every dollar she had siphoned away, every hidden stash, every ill-gotten gain, it was all locked down. When Daniel heard, he closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. It's over, he whispered. Really over. I looked at him. My son, who had finally opened his eyes and felt both the ache of all we had endured and the quiet triumph of survival. No, I said softly. It's just beginning. The rest of your life starts here, and for the first time in years, I believed it. The day of the final ruling dawned grey and cold, the kind of morning that seemed made for endings. Daniel and I walked up the courthouse steps together, his children holding my hands as though they instinctively knew this was not just another day. It was the day everything changed. Reporters were already gathered outside, their cameras pointed, microphones thrust forward. Questions buzzed through the air. Mrs. Ramirez, is it true she falsified signatures? Daniel, are you standing with your mother against your wife? We kept walking, our silence stronger than any words. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Clara sat at the front with her parents, her hair perfectly styled, makeup layered thick to hide the sleepless nights. But nothing could hide the cracks in her facade, her twitching hands, the way her eyes darted, the brittle smile she tried to hold. When she glanced at Daniel, he didn't look back. That, I think, cut her deeper than anything I could have said. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Papers rustled. Mr. Patel rose with quiet confidence, presenting the last of the evidence. Laura had even agreed to testify, her voice calm and steady as she recounted every dollar Clara had drained from their partnership. Clara tried to object, tried to paint Laura as bitter and vengeful, but the judge's frown silenced her quickly. Finally, the ruling was read. The trust was upheld. The house was mine, indisputably. The secured note was valid. Daniel bore no obligation to repay money siphoned fraudulently. Clara was ordered to return funds misappropriated from both Laura and the business, with penalties attached. And the court formally referred her case for criminal investigation. The words landed like thunder. Clara's face went white, her parents frozen beside her. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Clara erupted. She leapt to her feet, her voice shrieking, echoing off the wooden walls. "You can't do this to me! I made him! I built everything he is! You can't take it all away!" The judge's voice boomed, calm but stern. "Order. Sit down, or I'll have you removed." But Daniel was the one who silenced her. He stood slowly, his voice low, but carrying through the room. "No, Clara. You didn't build me. You broke me. My mother built me back up. And now you'll have to face what you've done." The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Clara's parents tugged at her arms, trying to pull her down, but she fought them, her screams turning raw, desperate, almost feral. It took 2 bailiffs to escort her out. Her voice echoed long after she was gone, a hollow sound that clung to the walls like smoke. When the room finally emptied, Daniel stood beside me, his hands trembling. "It's over," he whispered. I looked at him, at the man who had finally chosen truth over lies, love over manipulation. I placed a hand on his cheek and smiled through the tears that blurred my vision. "No, my son. It's just beginning. The chains are broken now. The rest of your life can finally be yours." As we walked down the courthouse steps together, the cold air rushed around us, but I felt warmth blooming in my chest. The children ran ahead, their laughter cutting through the grey morning like sunlight breaking clouds. Daniel walked at my side, not as a broken man, not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had fought for, the father who would now fight for his own children. I knew then that my revenge was complete, not because Clara had lost, but because Daniel had been saved. That evening, when the courthouse lights had gone dark and the last reporters drifted away, we sat around my small kitchen table, the same table where Daniel once did his homework as a boy, the same table where I had shown him the papers that opened his eyes. The children played on the floor with blocks and toy cars, their laughter filling the air like music. Daniel sat across from me, shoulders heavy but eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, worn down by months of fighting, but there was strength in it. "If it weren't for you, I'd still be blind. I'd still be chained to her lies." I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "You don't need to thank me. You're my son. A mother doesn't stop fighting for her child, no matter how far he strays. But you saved yourself, Daniel. You chose to open your eyes. That was something only you could do." He looked down, tears glinting in his lashes. "I wasted so much time. I hurt you. I let her turn me against you. I'll never forgive myself for that." My voice softened, breaking with emotion. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about choosing to move forward in spite of it. You've chosen to move forward. That's enough. Silence lingered between us, not heavy now, but peaceful. The kind of silence that feels like healing. The kind that makes you believe in new beginnings. The children ran up then, one climbing onto Daniel's lap, the other tugging at my sleeve. "Grandma?" the youngest said, her little voice bright and innocent. "Are we going to stay here forever?" I smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. "You'll always have a home here." Always. Daniel's arms tightened around his daughter. He looked at me, his lips trembling into a smile. "They'll grow up knowing what family really means," he said. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Later that night, after the children were asleep and Daniel had gone to bed, I sat alone by the window, staring out at the snow drifting softly under the street lamp. For the first time in years, my chest didn't ache with the weight of betrayal. Instead, I felt light. Not because revenge had destroyed Clara, but because truth had freed us. I thought back to Christmas night, the night Daniel told me I was no longer family. How those words had sliced me open, how I had walked out into the snow and made that single phone call. I smiled bitterly at the memory. That was the night they thought they had ended me. But it was the night I truly began again. Family isn't about blood alone. Blood can betray. Blood can abandon. Real family is the people who choose you, who stand by you, who love without taking, without lying, without demanding you shrink to make room for their greed. Daniel was my family. His children were my family. And in saving them, I had saved myself. I whispered into the quiet night, a vow and a reflection all at once. Real family isn't who you're related to. Real family is who stands beside you. And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing that this chapter of pain was finished and that tomorrow would be a day of peace.